In this video, we are going to learn what it means to say that a number is divisible by 5, how to easily tell if a number is divisible by 5, and when this is useful. A number is called divisible by 5 if we had that number of objects and could divide them into 5 groups of the same size. Let's think about how many pencils we would have to have so that we could divide them equally among 5 people, so that each person had the same number of pencils. If we had 1, 2, 3, or 4 pencils, we couldn't divide them equally among 5 people. But if we had 5 pencils, we could do this. Each person would get 1 pencil. So we say 5 is divisible by 5. What about 6 pencils? Or 7, 8, or 9 pencils? For example, if we had 9 pencils, we couldn't divide them among 5 people so that each person had the same number. 4 people could have 2 pencils each, but the 5th person would only have 1 pencil. Since we cannot divide 6, 7, 8, or 9 pencils evenly among 5 people, we say that 6, 7, 8, and 9 are not divisible by 5. But if we had 10 pencils, we could divide them equally among 5 people, with each person getting 2 pencils. So we say 10 is divisible by 5. What is the next number of pencils we could have that we could divide equally among 5 people? Hopefully, you can see that 11, 12, 13, and 14 pencils could not be divided equally among 5 people, but 15 pencils could, with each person getting 3 pencils. So we say 15 is divisible by 5. Let's start a list of numbers that we know are divisible by 5. 5, 10, 15. What do you think the next number is in this list? If we notice that to get from 5 to 10, you add 5, and to get from 10 to 15, you also add 5, a good guess about the next number in the list would be 5 more than 15, or 20. Let's continue the list for a bit. 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. All of these numbers are divisible by 5. Now let's look at the 5 times tables. The answers in the 5 times tables are exactly the same as the list of numbers divisible by 5. Let's notice something else about the numbers in the list and in the 5 times table. All of these numbers end in either a 0 or a 5. So, a quick way to tell if a number is divisible by 5 is to look at the last digit. If the last digit is a 0 or a 5, then the number is divisible by 5. We call this the divisibility test for 5. Now let's look at some numbers and decide whether or not they are divisible by 5. Since 35 ends in a 5, 35 is divisible by 5. Since 450 ends in a 0, 450 also is divisible by 5. 7,151 does not end in a 0 or a 5, so it is not divisible by 5. 21,876 also does not end in a 0 or a 5, so it is not divisible by 5. 941,325 ends in a 5, so 941,325 is divisible by 5. Let's summarize what we have learned in this video. A number is called divisible by 5 if we had that number of objects and could divide them into 5 groups of the same size. To tell if a number is divisible by 5, look at the last digit. If the last digit is a 0 or a 5, then the number is divisible by 5. One time when it is very useful to know whether a number is divisible by 5 is when simplifying fractions. So, it is important to remember that the way to tell if a number is divisible by 5 is to look at the last digit. If the last digit of the number is a 0 or a 5, then the number is divisible by 5. If the last digit is anything else, then the number is not divisible by 5.